Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the ThinkPiece Podcast number 5. We've been down for a little while, but definitely not out. We're like that STD that just keeps returning when you least expect it.
We're still here.
Yeah, man, that itch that never goes away. So this time we chose a piece on the Huffington Post Highline. I think we've done an article from them before on school lunches, and it's the long-form journalism wing of the Huffington Post. This time we chose an article called Millennials Are Screwed, or FML, standing for Fuck My Life, written by Michael Hobbs. So this piece basically talks about the plight of the millennial. Now, they define that as anyone born from 82 to, 2006? 2004. Sorry, 82 to 2004. So that places Dave Brennan and I just out of that range, but I think we would...
Snowflakes, I like to call them. Fucking snowflakes.
But I think that we would all agree that the problems discussed in here are facing us just as much as anyone born a year and a half later than us or 2 years later than us. So yeah, we're going to talk about millennials are screwed. Guys, initial thoughts or things that jumped out to you about the article as a whole?
Yeah, you mentioned something just there that kind of struck me was, and I think he even acknowledges it early in the piece, is it's a huge group of people that he's referring to, and I mean, it's a huge task to try to address anything like that. But in some sense, it actually, all these things affect almost everyone. So I sort of forgot towards the end that he was really even talking about millennials, to be honest. It was really, a lot of it was just me thinking about my own life or other people, even older or younger. It didn't matter, and how all these issues impact them. So I think there are a lot of interesting issues that we'll delve into. And clearly one of the things we like to talk about, which I think is interesting, is what is the role of government in addressing some of these issues, and what is the role of people on their own or corporations or other things. So I think we'll get into some of that, but it certainly highlighted a lot of what I think are key issues that we all face. But yeah, I thought, it was thought provoking, and absent of weird diagrams and some interesting language choices, I thought it was pretty good. So.
Brennan, I think Dave brings up a good point about it sort of transcends the different generations. I forgot at one point that it was focused on millennials as well. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a subject that really affects everybody and applies to everybody. The other side of that coin, though, I think, even though we're just slightly outside of the definition of the millennial, I think there might be a more focused target that really was even more affected by some of the things that they talk about within the article. In that, when we graduated from college, which we were all lucky and skilled, fortunate enough to do, there were jobs available. Should you?
The economy was pretty good.
Take them. Yeah. So the economy was pretty good then. Whereas a few years after we graduated, of course, that certainly wasn't the case. And I think that might have been, a target audience, maybe even of this piece, that things really would have resonated with. All of us have found success in various careers and haven't had hard times as much as a lot of the people that were mentioned in this article. Even though it does affect us, and I think we see this in society at large, I think, we have, the three of us at least, have likely been somewhat immune to it in certain ways. And it was interesting to get kind of a lot of different perspectives. And of course we see it and then recognize it. But I think the more and more we learn about it, the more we can help change things. Not that I'm actually going to do anything. Let me stop myself right
Talk
there.
Talk about other people changing it.
Yeah, we'll make a podcast, but stop right there.
Listen to this one, all you do-gooders, and then go do something about it.
Yeah, right?
No, that's a good point, though. I mean, you're right. I've seen some of the data before, but I always forget the timing of when you graduate and what the job market looks like has such an impact on literally your earnings potential your whole career, which is rather unfortunate, actually. But
yeah,
it's
so
reality.
I mean, yeah, that's not lost, I think, at all in terms of the specific problems that the people that graduated college. I think he was pointing out 2009 to about 2012, people that were graduating college kind of just got passed over, and by the time the economy had started to rebound, those people weren't necessarily looking for those same kind of jobs, and a lot of companies were hiring kids right out of college, and they were looking at these people. They're like, "Well, you graduated 4 years ago. What have you been doing with yourself?"
Yeah, you're damaged goods at that point.
And
Absolutely.
so,
Right.
yeah, I think while the problems are universal, the way they affect that specific scope is different than how they affect the rest of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, the first part, sort of the intro, and the first chapter, throws some big number statistics at you about millennials, that they've taken on 300% more student loan debt than their parents had, that they're about half as likely to own a home as young adults were in 1975. About 1 in 5 of 18 to 34-year-olds are living in poverty. And based on current trends, most of them won't be able to retire till they're at least 75 years old. So those numbers right there, specifically, I think for us in general, when we look at it bigger picture, that's troubling. Not for me because I do have student debt, but I also own a home, and I don't live in poverty. But generationally speaking, if that's the outlook for the people coming up, that's not a good outlook for the country. So, immediately I think you're drawn in with statistics like those. But he's quick to point out that while people might say that this is a generational thing, that these people are lazy and they just want to complain and don't want to get up off their butts, there's real data to show that it's the last 30 plus years that this culmination of negative economic forces has come together. And he talks about what some of those are. So I'll start with this one. He talks about basically how wages have stagnated since the early 1980s, late 1970s, early 1980s. And that was a recession as well. So we're coming out of a recession in the late 1970s. And then we go Reagan, Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, and Obama. And throughout all those times and all those presidents and all the different Republican or Democrat-led Congresses, wages have basically stayed the same while prices have continued to inflate. And that's adjusting everything for inflation. Wages have pretty much stagnated over the last 30 plus years. And I think that, to me, is the thing that gets overlooked. Unemployment numbers get thrown around a lot. Underemployment numbers get thrown out a lot. But what does it really matter if you have a job if that job's not paying you what you're going to need to support a family or buy food or to pay your rent or to buy a house, etc.? So I'll leave it at that and let you guys talk about it.
I'll jump right in. I agree 100% with your opinion there, man. I mean, I find it unfathomable that we can create a minimum wage that's $7 and what is it now?
25 cents, $7.25.
$7.25. I mean, in what communities can you live on $7.25 an hour and support yourself, let alone a family at all? I saw statistics that even in the most affordable places in the country, in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, it's still inadequate. You're still under the poverty line. And in other states that haven't risen it raised the minimum wage to a higher level, it's still impossible. I know here in Colorado, starting next week in 2018, that it goes up to $10.80. Well, $10.80 means you're making $1,600 a month before taxes, and that is about enough to get you a 1-bedroom apartment somewhere in the city. And that's it. I don't know how you're going to pay for food. Childcare, I just found out, is ridiculous. I had no idea how anybody making anywhere close to minimum wage, or even 150% or even 200%, twice minimum wage, makes a reasonable living. And I think that the government, a lot of times, giving corporations the power to not pay their employees that much, but then in turn, essentially bitching about people needing government handouts and then slashing those. It's just created this entire culture of dependency and inadequacy that is completely not sustainable and has incredible effects across our society.
Dave?
Yeah, no, I completely agree about minimum wage and certainly low-wage jobs and the complete inability to live any sort of life with those wages. I think the minimum wage one is difficult. I certainly think it should be a hell of a lot higher. I don't know what that number is. I think at a certain point you do run the risk of inflation really overtaking the benefits that you're giving to some of those people. So obviously there's some limit, but what that is, I think we could be much more sophisticated about actually finding out and testing. But I think
larger macroeconomics at stake there.
Exactly, yeah. But I think in some ways the bigger issue, and you got at it, is even if you make $15 an hour in Denver or any sort of decent-sized city, or $17 an hour, and you have a child or two and you need to pay for health care, it's still damn difficult. So it's not, even for jobs that are twice the minimum wage now, I think all of these things are still sadly very relevant, and then it's very difficult to live a life. So I don't know what, and we'll get into some of the things, but it's not just about the government mandating minimum wage. It's really how have we found ourselves with an economy that doesn't have enough juice for workers to demand more money or to get more money, and that is a tough one.
Let's start with that. Let's jump into that. The U.S. produces fewer of the kinds of jobs our parents had. That was a sentence from the article that sort of jumped out at me. And then I started digging outside of the article into a little bit about why that is. We're talking about maybe jobs that are high wage but low education. So think about an auto worker job for Ford back in the 1970s, where you were getting paid $22, $23 an hour. Now, look at that for inflation. That's like getting paid $45 an hour now.
Right.
So if you think about that, these are people with no education. No education beyond high school, excuse me. And what they're doing is they're working their way up in a company. Did they start at that? No, they didn't start at that, but they were able to work their way up in that. They had a pension in place that they could retire with after X number of years. But, he points out that around really after that recession, when wages started to stagnate, what happened was we started to put power into the hands of corporations. And it was no longer the goal of a company and a corporation to do their, I hate this phrase, but their corporate citizenry and be accountable to their workers. They were now accountable to a board of directors, a CEO, their stockholders, and that's who they answer to before everyone else. And with that comes things like, if you guys have ever seen the movie Wall Street, people like Gordon Gekko that come in and they break these companies up, or if they don't break them up, they say, okay, well, here's what you got to do. You've got these people that have been here 25 years. You're paying them way too much money. Come in, hire new young people that can do the exact same thing for half the price. We boot these people out. Then we can cut costs by doing X, Y, and Z. So we start shifting everybody to 401k style pension plans. We start shifting everybody to all of these things that take power out of the hands of the worker. So when you have full-time employees with pensions and all this stuff at stake, people are willing to stand up and fight and strike and everything else. And once you start to sort of pull that stuff away little by little, whether it's getting rid of middle management to cut money, whether it's shifting pension styles, every bit of that chips away at those workers, the stronghold that they have to demand what is owed them or demand a fair wage. And again, it's not just a question of wage, but how much power do we give these corporations? How much do we say, this is how much you're beholden to your shareholders, but this is how much you're beholden to your workers? You know, as someone who thinks that free market, let me rephrase that thinks that a freewheeling free market economy is about the worst thing ever. You have to put, like, greed just runs rampant. There has to be some sort of oversight on these companies. The market will not sort it out. Greed will sort it out. And the money will rise to the top and the worker will get screwed every time. What do you guys think?
Yeah, well, but I would argue, I mean, the way the system's set up, is it really free market? Is it really free reign? I mean, who gets, I mean, you just saw it in the tax bill that was just passed. Who gets the benefits these days? It's corporations, it's Wall Street, it's people who literally, they created a category for people who do not do anything except earn money off of money. They can create a new business and pay lower taxes than everybody. So is that a free market? I don't think so. I think that's completely rigged. So this thing feeds on itself. And I think it's so related. All of the things that have allowed the richest people to get even richer and to broaden and deepen the inequality are the exact same things that hurt the employees. I mean, you mentioned it, but the way that CEOs are compensated, the ownership structure, including my own company, when you see private equity buying these companies and the things they do, because they have a hell of an incentive to make money and the government supports them. I mean, the whole thing is rigged, and all those things lead to wages being suppressed, benefits being cut. And again, there are absolutely competitive reasons why this is happening. If workers were more in demand, this wouldn't be as easy to do. But we sure as hell make it easy for companies and private equity funds to do this kind of thing. It's completely rigged. That's why it's laughable even when you read articles from fairly reputable sources about like the tax bill to not acknowledge and I mean some of them do, but it's an absolute joke that the people who are in power write these things for themselves, and it just makes this whole problem work. It's so obvious that all these policies create and deepen these things we're talking about, but no one really cares. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, they elect these people. People don't organize and make unions like they used to, because that's been
neutered, totally neutered.
Neutered. Yeah, well said. I mean, Jason, you're likely a member of a teachers union. Is that right?
We have an educators association, which means it's completely up to us whether we want to join or not. So it's not a mandated union.
They negotiate on your behalf.
They lobby on our behalf.
Lobby on your behalf.
So because we're dealing with the state, so we have lobbyists that work for the. But yeah, I mean,
sounds like a neutered union.
Well, to some extent it is. On the other hand, we're going through a pension crisis here. I won't get too far off track, but it's allowing us to stay strong because they can't really just come in and bust up our Educators Association, which most of the people are choosing to be in, and pay the $750 in dues per year. I mean, it's not cheap to be a member of it.
$750 to a teacher is that's a good chunk of money for especially a new teacher. I know what that's like.
And so if you have, split up over the entire year, if you sign up right away, you don't know what you're missing on each paycheck. You're like, oh, okay, over 26 paychecks, or what is it? I don't know, $15 or something.
Yeah, but if you're making $30-something thousand a year as a new teacher, that's 5% of your salary. Like, that's real money.
I'm not saying it's not. So we've got about 60, a little over 65% of the teachers in the state are part of KEA, which is the largest one. There's another smaller one called CAPE, which is a little bit more libertarian in their political ideologies, but they're still fighting for teachers.
Is it spelled like Colin Kaepernick with a K?
K, as in Kentucky.
Which would be ironic.
Yeah.
Kentucky Association of State Educators. But yeah, I mean, back to your point, if you look at places like Wisconsin or Kansas where governors like Rick Scott and Sam Brownback have come in and with the exact same agenda as our governor came in with, which is break up unions, insert charter schools, and basically try to privatize education, cut taxes, and try to privatize education, and then bust up the pension system to create a better flow of money for the state and allow rich people to pay less in taxes. So
that's so fucked up, man. That's the place where you would start. The place where you would start is with teachers.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
Well,
the people we should be paying much, much more
Yep.
are the ones that you think are bilking the system. Get the hell out of here.
Yep. And by the way, and you agreed to that, like that was part of the deal when they took those jobs. So it's not like this is unknown.
That was part of the deal when you elected assholes into power as well. The worst.
So back to what you were saying though, Brennan, this neutering of unions, like what?
Back to neutering.
Back to neutering. Back to.
But like I'm sure, Dave, you and I, as people who work for your company, very big, mine relatively small, but with a lot of moving pieces and a lot of different jobs within that company. I mean, there's no unions. I wouldn't know where to start. And if I did, I'd probably get scanned immediately with a 3-month severance, and I would probably skip out the door with with my severance package and then cry all the way to the bank. I don't know. But like it would be fantastic if the workers of the world united. I feel like I've heard that somewhere before. And did take back the power from these giant corporations. The way that's supposed to happen is by electing officials who will look out for you, but that people don't elect the people who will look out for them, and the people in power who say that they will don't. And it leads to this sort of situation, I think, where the corporations do have all the power, and then it leads to the kind of economy that we happen to live in.
Yeah.
Union work, Brennan, went from 1 in 3 in the late 1960s to 1 in 10 today, by the way. So
right.
Unionized workers, that was from the article.
What industries have the biggest unions? I mean, is there like factories?
Auto.
Sure.
Well,
auto still has that legacy still.
Yeah, even some manufacturing in general. Yeah.
And I will. I mean, again, it's a pendulum. Unions need to exist because without them, workers get screwed. But at the same time, unions can get too much power and put squeeze on corporations. There was a lot of mismanagement by the auto companies, but they were also losing money on cars because of how much they were paying workers and how much was going into pensions and things like that. So when the auto industry was retooled in the mid 2000s, that was a lot of what changed. Is basically both parties had to come to the table and they say, "Look, you're crippling us making cars here in America," and so. There's something to be said for a balance, but when you eliminate one side of the balance altogether, the other side just runs rampant. So,
yep.
Okay. All right. So, well,
just so happens they were making shitty cars for about 30 years too.
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, and that wasn't the workers designing the cars.
Exactly. It wasn't their fault.
So, well, let's then talk about some of the stuff that faces we're talking about this millennial worker and how over the last 30 years, their earning power has gone down as a result of stagnating wages, about how unionization has gone down and corporations have gotten stronger, which has taken a lot of the power of the working class man or woman. We're equal here. It's not an event.
We don't have any women on our podcast ever.
No.
Though.
Well,
No.
Sarah's listening in, but I don't let her speak.
In theory,
But again, we talk about it. Like somebody else can actually do it.
Right.
Just kidding.
Right. I think that's been a kind of unifying strain in all our lives. We've talked about women a lot more than we've actually dealt with them. Anyway,
I think that's because
for long stretches of our lives.
I think that's because, even though two of us are married and one of us has a serious girlfriend, I think we know so little about women that we've just stuck to our strengths and talked about what
Well, none of us had sisters, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's true, man. That's true.
So, the byproducts of these things are poverty levels, which are high, healthcare, which is an interesting component. Not just, that's a whole nother discussion on the price of it, but how quickly something like a health event could send someone into poverty, someone that was doing okay into poverty or just making it into poverty. And home ownership rates slowing for people of this generation. So those are some of the byproducts that this guy hit on. So let's start with poverty levels. He talks about how close so many people are in this generation, and I'll get the statistic here for us in just a second, but how close so many people are to living below that poverty line due to all the factors that we talked about, and specifically for that group that came out of college from 2009 to 2012, like you talked about, that sort of forgotten generation and how close they are to poverty, even the educated ones. So talk about that for a minute, guys.
Yeah, to me, it's, it obviously, as you said, it's a byproduct of everything else going on. So I don't know how you manage that directly. It's a statistic, it's a result.
Sure.
And clearly has a huge impact on people's life. And I think, as it said, a couple of people sort of said this or something like this, but the two big causes of basically someone going into bankruptcy or sort of entering poverty or whatever you want to call it are either a health incident or some sort of accident, primarily auto accident. So again, those things will happen. They always happen. You can't prevent those. So
sure.
The question is, how do you have a system that when these things happen, which we know they happen to a certain number of people every year, and they always will, how do we, mitigate the impact? And I think that's where you get into things like, what policies or, how do you get people in jobs such that they don't have $300 in their savings account, they have $5,000.
Right. And also like what health insurance really means. Like
exactly.
If you have it, but an accident still ruins you financially, do you really have health insurance?
Exactly. And I think that's where the whole, in theory, the idea of a high deductible plan makes sense to me, because that is really what insurance is. That's what home insurance is. It can be what auto insurance is, although people generally have more choice on how much they want to pay versus what they want their deductible to be. But we've set up a system where it's acceptable that a healthcare deductible, or at least your out-of-pocket expenses in any one year, can be $5,000 or $7,000, which, okay, that's fine for some part of the population. But when people have $50, $300, $400 in their bank account at any one time, if anything happens to them, and by the way, if anything happens to you, it at least costs you like $1,000. It's insane.
Yeah, anything.
Anything, car-wise or body-wise. It's insane. So we have mismatch. If we really think that these insurance systems are going to prevent people from quickly going into poverty or bankruptcy or whatever, we are kidding ourselves. That's not going to happen. And again, unless you start addressing some of these systemic things that we've talked about, I mean, again, healthcare is probably a completely different conversation, but having people with jobs that are paying more than $10 an hour, I don't see how you deal with this, really.
Yeah. So what else is draining the, people's banks besides the fact that they are, let's say they are healthy, they stay healthy, but so many people, they still have living close to this poverty line that an event of some sort, health or a car accident, or, any sort of major event that's going to cost you money. It could be a washer, dryer breaking, or like a gas line busting on your property that you have to pay for, like some weird sort of thing. But why is it that we only have $300 in our bank accounts? Well,
I think.
Go ahead.
Brennan kind of started going through the math before. Let's just take, $10 an hour job. Maybe that's on the low side, but let's say you make $2,000 a month. Well, even let's say that's post taxes. So really, that's, you're making
40 grand.
15, whatever it is an hour. So way up, double minimum wage, at least.
Yeah.
And you've got rent. Again, depending on where you live, but let's say that's, $600, $700 a month. Then you've got car insurance, which is $100 a month. And then you've got health insurance, which is, if you're lucky, it's $200 a month. But for a lot of people, it's a lot more than that. You've got food, which most people spend, I don't know, at least $100 or $50 a week, $75 a week. Incidentals. I mean, if you ever want to get new clothes or travel a little bit or pay for gas, I mean,
yeah,
you're not saving much money.
No doubt.
Less. You're not saving any money. You're
not
saving negative
money. And that's why I think the math is pretty straightforward. I mean,
right, and that's why I think that if you mandate that corporations, businesses pay a wage that allows people to live above the poverty line, and the difference in that in my town here in Denver is at the bare minimum, in order to make a wage where, by certain statistics, of course, but they're very modest, and you'd have to make $14 an hour in order to essentially live here.
I totally believe it.
At the poverty line, and
your towns,
your towns, I'm sure, are a bit different. We're raising the minimum wage to $10 and change here next week, like I mentioned. So at that point, you're 60% of the way there, 70% of the way. How do you make that happen?
Yeah.
And it goes up astronomically if you happen to have a kid. And that was assuming I did the math on their child care, because I was like, where are they taking their kids in this statistic? And because it was like $30 a day child care, which to me it exists like at the North Pole or someplace else. I don't know about.
Maybe some lady down on the corner that has 12 other kids in her house during the day or something.
We tried to go to her because I believe in a bilingual education, and they wouldn't take us, and they still wanted $75 a day. So, so I mean, unless people are assured that if they work, that they can make a decent living, I don't know how the hell you get out of that cycle where that if you stub your toe, you're gonna default on your rent, your car, whatever, and people need transportation to get around, especially in a lot of cities that don't have good public transportation. But even public transportation isn't free. It's unbelievable how we can set up a system that just makes sure that people fail, man, because we need people in a city to do these low-paying jobs. You know, I go to all these places all the time, man, that I know people aren't making that much money. You know, they're making $8-10 an hour maybe, and I patronize them all the time, and you guys do too, whether it's you know, fast food or dry cleaners. I haven't been to a dry cleaners almost never in my life. I'm more like
grocery
like
stores.
You would if you had to.
Yeah.
Groceries. Thank you. I'm trying.
Car
I really
washes,
go to dry
any of those kind of places. Yeah, I'm right there with you, man.
I
You
mean,
know,
every business you look at is like all these people are making such low wages. How do they survive?
well, and I think that's, and this is where I wanted this to lead, sort of. But there's got to be other ideas or other things than just like mandating. Let's talk for a second about how, you know, he's got this statistic in here that a baby boomer that went to college from 1973 to 1977 could have worked 306 minimum wage hours and paid for their undergraduate education.
That was fascinating.
For the millennial,
Yeah, it was.
it's 4,459 hours. So you literally in the mid to early 70s could have worked for 2 summers and paid for your college education. Even at that time, even get paid $3 an hour. You could have, or whatever it was, you can work 306 hours over 2 summers, is what I'm saying. In the time you have off for 2 summers, you could have made that. You've got to work
Yeah,
for
half a year, we'll
you've
call
got
it.
to work for 20 years at minimum wage to afford this at the rate that they're talking about. So, I mean, making college more affordable, that's definitely a thing that leads to high, college. There's zero statistics that go against the fact that if you do go to college and graduate, you are going to earn more in wages over the course of your lifetime. I mean, that's just fact. Even if it's just a little bit of college, you're going to earn more than someone that just has a high school degree. Now, obviously, that there's exceptions to that rule out there, but by and large, you are going to make much more if you have a college degree. So making that more accessible obviously would help. But what else? I mean, is it insurance? Are we talking about life and car and health insurance that we should be looking at? Homeowners insurance that we should be looking at and saying, why do we pay this much for something that's that we still have to pay even more for? Is it? Let me throw like 2 more things out, Dave, and I'll let you come in. Is it, transportation is something that Brendan brought up. How many cities are bike friendly that allow you alternate modes to get to your job? How many cities do have good public transportation? How many cities, go out of their way to make it so that you don't have to own a car or own 2 cars? I think these are all legitimate things that we spend a large chunk of our incomes on. And this is without even getting into home ownership, which is going to be like our last little thing that we talk about, and the cost of, rent and mortgages and those things. But are there other tweaks that we can make other than just saying we got to raise minimum wage, we got to pay people more? I mean, I think paying people is part of it, but I don't think it gets us all the way there. So what do you guys think? Where are the other places where we can do some damage on this?
Yeah, I mean, to me, you're absolutely right. I mean, wages are the number 1 thing, the number 2 thing, the number 3 thing. I mean, that is what has to fundamentally change. I mean, we absolutely should work on some of those other things you talked about, like whether it's transportation and parking subsidies or, healthcare, obviously. But to me, is how do you get corporations are doing very well. I mean, there is all kinds of money, cash that companies are sitting on. Their stocks
A handful of individuals are doing real well.
They have no incentive to give that money to their employees, and that's kind of the head scratcher. And you mentioned it before, and the old model of taking care of your employees and understanding that they were going to be there for their whole career and they were going to live a good life, and there was pride in that, and it ultimately made your brand and your company better. I mean, that is just completely gone, and it's very few people just slicing and dicing and milking all this stuff for as much money as they can until the next person comes in and does some version of the same thing. And the sickening part, as I mentioned before, is, and I'll keep bringing it up because it's just nauseating, is we keep implementing public policy and law that makes this easier and easier and easier to do,
Yeah,
and to give
absolutely.
people more and more incentive to do it. And you're screwing over the people who again, the argument is that, our 50 guy worth $50 billion needs this extra $3 billion instead of saying, you know what, I think we would all be happier, including, by the way, some of those people with $50 billion would be a hell of a lot happier and better if that money was spent on the actual employees of these companies. And again, it's not a giveaway. It's not just saying, hey, here's freebies, but how do you design the system or create these incentives that the money is going to employees? And by the way, it's not easy. It's not easy to make sure the money goes to them because, hey, there's an absolute element of you're going to pay people what the going rate is and not necessarily a penny more, which I understand, and I'm not, in principle, I'm not fundamentally against that, but I'm
for CEOs too.
What's that?
It should go for CEOs too.
Absolutely. But absent any of that, even if those things aren't easy to fix, it sure shit is easy to fix, not just giving these people more money, and that is outrageous. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And the argument that money will flow to, obviously we
that's
all
been
know that's
proven
a joke.
So
and
wrong.
There's no study that supports
fucking
it.
years.
But half of our politicians stand up there and say it with a straight face, and people believe it. They don't demand anything.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So
they believe
not
it.
only
they vote them in.
So not only are the policies accomplishing the opposite of what those people think they're voting for and that would be in their best interest, it's actually making it much more difficult. And again, I don't think this is not all about government, because there are other issues. And like you said, to get competitive wages higher is challenging, and some of it has to do with trade agreements. Some of it has to do with, obviously, a lot of it has to do with the global economy and how we fit into it. But to just make things easier and easier for, capital owners is just absolutely ridiculous.
But there is one fundamental thing that economists, both left and right, agree on, and that is, with a thriving middle class, the economy as a whole is better, is stronger, top to bottom, is more sustainable. When you put money in the hands of middle class people, they spend it. They don't hoard it.
Yeah.
They don't put it in. And that may not save or fix the saving problem, or it may not fix the one life event away from the poverty line problem. In the sense that people have more money, they're going to spend it. But guess what? That money gets recouped by those big companies and those stockholders either way. You don't have to give that to them in order for them to keep that money. If you put
it'll all be spent.
I know.
Absolutely.
So,
and those CEOs of giant companies were incredibly forthright recently, saying that if you give us giant tax breaks, we're going to keep it and we're going to hoard it. It's not going to trickle down to anyone else. We're not going to slash prices. We're not going to give it to our workers. We're going to keep it. I couldn't believe when I heard some of these.
I appreciate
CEOs say this, and they were essentially saying you probably shouldn't actually give us this giant ripoff to the normal person tax cut, because it's not going to work economically. And somehow even with that nugget of information, things still ended up going their way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And frankly, it's not really even about the CEOs. It's about the owners of the companies. That's really, I think, can you argue about CEO pay? And there are all kinds of weird.
Yeah, it's the board of directors.
And stock options. And it's the people who own. I say it with my own company. And we changed our. We went through this strategy thing, and we changed our company vision and all those sort of things. And there was this long debate, and we ended up putting in the company vision, which is supposed to inspire employees and ultimately customers. We put in there, one of the main lines was creating outstanding return for our shareholders. That was it. And I don't fault them for that, because that's that's literally how they judge our upper management and our CEO. That's it. But it's like a harsh reminder that those are the people dictating the policy of, and our company is one small example of every major company is run the exact same way. How can the owner milk as much out of it as he can? And okay, not every company. Some companies view the world a little bit differently, but most of them, it's a very impersonal monetary transaction, and we're making easier and easier for those people to skim more and more off of this. That's just a fact.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, until
I don't think I totally answered your original question, Jason. But,
no,
I don't have any great idea.
No, I don't think that we necessarily.
Yeah, how do we do it? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think that there is, again, like everything that we bring up on here, they're bigger issues than you can fix with one magic bullet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just one thing that you do. The tide shifting is something for me that, as we get more into, let's save any, we'll save any fixes for the end. I want to get into this home ownership component for just a minute, and talk about how it, this is something that my dad's been a mortgage broker for 30 years, and I sat down and talked with him a little bit about, what do you think the tax cuts are going to do to this and to your industry, to your business, and he said it'll probably boost a little bit in terms of if people have more money in their pocket, they spend it, and so if on their paychecks their wages are increasing, people are probably going to buy more houses. On the flip side, people buying houses over $500,000 are probably going to get hit a little bit more on the other side of their taxes, not be able to write off all their mortgage interest. He's like, so that might deter people from buying houses over $500,000. And I sat there after I heard him say that, and I was thinking to myself, and I have no idea what you guys paid for your real estate. You guys are both homeowners like myself, or what the median prices are in the areas, in the cities where you live or areas where you live. But that anecdote in here about the guy in in Seattle, the author, and talking about his dad, the house that he bought in the mid 1970s on his professor's salary, basically costing him $175,000, and then today it would be about $830,000, and he had to work about 10 years, or I think it was 2 years of his full salary or 3 years of his full salary to pay it off back then, whereas he would have to work 10 to 20 years or something like that to pay it off now. The inflation cost of everything, at some point we've got to get a handle on what things cost. The housing market in Lexington is absurd. Like our neighborhood, I mean, we just bought our house 2.5 years ago. We could probably sell it for $40,000 or $50,000 more than we bought it for. And granted, we did some renovations. I'm not even taking that into account. It's just like there's so few things out there for people like us that have steady employment that don't necessarily have a lot of money down, but it's so easy. Like banks just lend and lend and lend and lend. And my dad said this the other night. He said, people buy houses because they can, not because they necessarily need to, but like the bank's willing to lend it to them. He's like, I advise people against it. I'm like, this is too much house for you. You're going to be stretching yourself thin. They're like, I make $250,000 a year. He's like, yeah, you don't need a $600,000 house. He's, you've got 2 car payments over $1,000 each. That blew my mind, by the way. 2 car payments that are each over $1,000. Like,
what are you doing?
Oh, God. But, back to the point, he talks in here about how zoning has crushed people that are trying to maybe move into suburbs, and reasons why housing is not affordable in certain areas for people that maybe want to get out of renting. He talked about how, just the overall cost, not only of home ownership is going up, but of renting. So these people stay poor because the cost to rent just keeps raising as well. And so they can never get enough money for a down payment or anything like that. The zoning thing brought up, I know, Dave, you saw that show, Show Me a Hero. It was about upstate New York, but how zoning and not wanting specific, is a way to basically segregate communities and has been used for all sorts of other terrible things. Zoning has been, but most recently it's to keep a specific type of person in a specific type of neighborhood. So what do you guys think about home ownership and how this plays into, number one, millennials not being able to build equity, but number two, I think it's a disturbing trend when we say that the American dream, one of the sort of hallmarks of the American dream is owning your own home, and to look at, in 10 years from now, maybe less than 40% of Americans able to afford their own home, and that number just going down. So what do you guys think about that?
It's crazy. On the surface, it seems like a pure example of supply and demand, and I think largely it is. I live here in Denver, desirable place to live. More and more people keep coming here, and I think that's true of both of your places too, in kind of different sliding scales, if you will, Lexington and Houston respectively. But we bought our house 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, and it's almost doubled in value.
Holy
crazy!
That's insane.
Yeah, I'll tell you the numbers, and I'll tell you, especially since no one will listen to this podcast. This is a phone call, really. But we bought it for $185, which is a lot of money. Anyway, that's $100,000 I'm talking about. $185. However you say it.
Okay.
Not $185. $185,000.
Tiny house.
Which is it's a shitload of money. It's, as I said back then when I bought it, it's not only all of my money now, it's all of my money forever. It's like you just keep feeding this thing, and most of it goes to interest, which is I think it just goes into somebody's it just goes into somebody's gold line pocket. It's all interest now. Like 90% of it's interest now, right? Yeah. So, but 185, that's a lot of money. That was 2.5 years ago. Apparently, my house is worth over $300,000 now. You guys, Dave, you've seen my house. Jason, you haven't had the displeasure of it. It's small. It's 780 square feet or something, and it has a pretty big backyard. But it's absurd. And
I would say
it's
that
also
it's quaint. It's a good location, and you have a hell of a backyard. But
Now, Brennan, not to knock your serious point, but did it double in value before or after you got the caravan in the back?
Well,
the spare bedroom.
I haven't had it appraised officially since I got. All of our listeners wouldn't have been privy to our conversation before this. I did just purchase a 1975 Cardinal 12-foot camper in need of serious repair that is currently in my backyard, and we'll stay there until we haul it in and out to go camping. But now I would say it's a 3-bedroom now, including that thing. But anyway, still 1 bath. No plumbing in there. But I don't know. It's a serious problem here in a lot of places that neighborhoods like mine, which are close to the city and desirable now, are becoming like so unaffordable. Housing prices have gone up so much. Most of the time when I look at statistics like the ones I've just mentioned about my own house, I love it, why wouldn't I want an extra, $150,000 essentially in my pocket? But, the flip side of that coin is that, like, okay, I can sell my house and have that much money in my pocket liquid, and then what?
Then where are you going to live?
Then we're going to...
And then you can put $100,000 down on a $500,000 house, and now you owe $400,000, which you'll be paying off for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Right. I just have to go buy another house exactly like this and pay the same. Like, I can't really upgrade on that. And then people who are in any way, people who aren't making as much money as I'm fortunate enough to make, which isn't a ton of money, have been completely priced out of my very modest, diverse neighborhood, not, somewhat crime-ridden neighborhood. They've been completely priced out of it in the course of, 2 or 3 years. And I know you guys have experienced this too. Once again, just a completely unsustainable model that in some ways I love. I'm quote unquote making all this money on my house, but I don't know where that, I'm not smart enough economically to know where that supply and demand bubble bursts.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right about the supply and demand. That's what it's all about. And Denver's a desirable city, and people keep moving there. And
as are Houston and Lexington at this point, in different scales, like I said.
And I think one of the things that Houston property's absolutely risen, and in some neighborhoods it's been out of control over the last few years, although it did come off a little bit after the oil and gas, crash a couple years ago. But there's a couple things in Houston that have probably helped it. One is just the amount of land that there is. I mean, they've been able to expand outward and still build houses. And the other thing here, and this is what was referenced in the article, is there is no zoning in Houston. So there's no zoning. So
wow.
I'm sure there are some restrictions, but there is no zoning. So, and you see it. I mean, you drive down any block in the city and you'll see condos, you'll see old houses, you'll see a gas station, you'll see a restaurant, you'll see, it's all in the same block, which is cool actually.
Yeah.
And it makes it livable. There's all kinds of interesting things, but it absolutely, it depresses property values for a number of reasons. One, you can build way more stuff on one. I mean, you can build condos, you can build, 6 units where in, most areas they'd only let you build 1 or 2. And that obviously creates more supply, but it also makes some of these areas a little bit less desirable because you don't know what's going to be built next to you. You can't keep people out. You can't, protect your little beautiful little neighborhood from, whatever anybody wants to do with the property. So I've seen it work. I mean, yes, you get some things that are less than desirable. In fact, next to our property, there's a sort of this warehousey thing that they do stuff during the day, but it's fine. Like on the weekends and the night, there's no activity or anything, so it's actually kind of nice. But they're selling the property, and there's a chance that it could be some noisy bar or restaurant, or who knows what, some ugly apartment complex. But if that
was Denver, it would be a giant grow house, I'm sure. But.
Yeah, exactly.
Not Texas and Kentucky might be
there are
away from
other
that.
regulations against that, but
yeah.
No, I think it definitely helps keep property values from exploding because you can use the land how you see fit. Again, there are some negatives,
in my neighborhood, and honestly, my backyard. If I could build a couple of units in my backyard and make money off of them and help kind of keep that livability and rent lower in the city, it'd be something I'd consider for sure. It'd be mutually beneficial for myself and society at large. I think to have a little more density in a neighborhood like mine, where in certain cases you could have it, but like you were saying, David, it's a zoning regulation in our particular neighborhood that you're not allowed to build the mother-in-law suites. You can apparently have campers, so.
Well, it's hilarious. Well, it's funny. Jason and I experienced this in Lexington in college. Our landlord built a house in our backyard. And
he's in jail now, by the way.
Was it annoying as hell for us? And did we complain like hell? Yes, but hey, did it create more, for campus housing, and ultimately did those things help keep prices lower? Absolutely, yes.
Right.
So I mean,
Right.
we, as the people who dealt with it, we bitched and complained, but hey, that's okay. You're allowed to do that, and then society moves on.
Yeah, good thing you only had to like put up with it for like 9 months of your lives. Or
Yeah, exactly. There was an end game. So.
Right.
Hey, when you're hungover every morning, 9 months is a long time to hear banging at 6 a.m.
Yeah, but a 21-year-old hangover is so different than our 35-year-old hangover.
You can easily sleep for like 12 hours without getting up, and your body can like recover.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, the sound of Milwaukee's Best Light cracking open somehow just revives you.
Oh, yes.
All right,
Those
so
are the days, man.
I think that we've come to about the end of the stuff he talks about in the article. His outlook is quite bleak if we don't do something ASAP.
As is mine.
One of the things that I will say he talks about is obviously getting involved, which Brennan correctly stated at the beginning is something that we are not saying that we are going to do, but we are definitely saying that you should go do it. If you think like we think, you should definitely do it.
Vote as I would and tell other people to do the same.
It's funny that you mentioned that. With all this, we alluded to it earlier, but with all the pension stuff going on in Kentucky, there's a Facebook group of teachers, and there's I think they're up to 13 now, people that are teachers or former teachers that are going to challenge in their districts to become state representatives in our state legislature because of this, because of the fact they feel like there's nobody in power that's fighting for teachers in certain counties, certain parts of the state that are maybe more left-leaning or right-leaning. Obviously that's a way to get it done. But beyond that, it's kind of funny. I recalled our first World Without Work podcast, and it talked about, what happens if we're up to 40%, 50%, 60% unemployment. Well, what happens if 40%, 50%, 60% of the people in America are making a wage that doesn't get them above the poverty line? And everybody's got, it's this gig economy where you've got, maybe 20 hours a week doing this and 20 hours a week doing this, 20 hours a week doing this. You got no health care through any of those things. You've got no benefits through other benefits like a pension through any of those things. What happens then? I mean, so again, I think that some of the things we brought up in that very first World Without Work podcast are, if things don't change, are going to be solutions that are examined. Things like a universal basic income with work on top of that, and doing away with other government assistance programs, or if healthcare is clearly a thing that is keeping people, in poverty if they have health issues and make low wages, we might have to deal with it that way. But regardless of what the way forward is in terms of dealing with all of these issues laid out in here, I think that the wage issue, not in terms of raising minimum wage, but how do we bring wages in line with inflation and then stop inflation from just keep going again? Because when people have more money, the price of things tends to go up. But there can't just be this rampant inflation with stagnating wage over the period of time that we've seen, because this is the mess that we find ourselves in. What are your all's thoughts? Talk to me.
Well,
I've got it. Go ahead, Brendan. Yeah, sorry.
No, I just think that the systematic inequality that we've put in place and continue to put in place, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, is going to have to change somehow. I don't have the answers. I'm not an economist, so and I'm not that smart in general, so I don't know. I don't have the answers, but policies that but policies that can continue to uphold those values will continue to sink us and continue to drive everything that we've talked about, and it does go back. It's all encompassing, man. school lunches have to be in there somewhere as well, I think. But
biohacking, NSA surveillance.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
Right. It's all. I mean, these things all do link together in certain ways, I think. But the systematic inequality that we continue to drive, I think, is the main thing that needs to be addressed. And if it's not, then the problems are going to continue to get worse and worse. And frankly, I'm not real hopeful that that's going to happen anytime real soon. I was up until, I don't know,
last November,
14 months ago. Yeah, right. And now it seems like a very distant dream. But I guess it sounds like we're kind of wrapping things up here. So my last point here, I guess, is that, you know, the more that we talk about this, I think the more and more people talk about this. I've become intensely interested in these issues and many, many, many others over the last, year and a half or so that, frankly, I was skating by, not thinking about, didn't have to think about. And I think there were a lot of people in that demographic with me for a long time. And the ability to not do anything for so long was, or I'm not being real articulate here, but the I guess the I don't know, just the ability to not do anything, being able to sit back and be complacent. What was nice. It was a luxury that we had, and now it feels like that's a luxury that we don't have. And the one hope that I have with all the pessimism that I do is that with what we see and what we've talked about today and so many other things, that it will get so many more people involved and make people maybe even produce better art, better, more meaningful music, visual art, go out there and make a difference with whatever you can do. Podcasts perhaps will be a huge medium for change. Certainly hope this one will be. But there's a lot of pessimism out there, but I think that may drive a lot of good things as well.
Right on. Dave?
Amen. I have a few thoughts. A few things that I think kind of on a smaller scale level that can be done that he mentioned in the article that I completely agree with. So things like some of the barriers to skilled trade, some of the qualifications and money needed to enter
really
certain trades is ridiculous. It's absolutely protectionist. And again, it helps the few but hurts the many. And I think those things, again, are fairly easy to get rid of. Transferable benefits. So the whole benefit system, not just healthcare, but like sick leave, retirement stuff, it's all based on the old model of one company, one job for your career. Mm-hmm. And I think that's obviously not the way it is anymore. So again, it's not an easy solution, but how do you have benefits and things that you've accrued travel with you when you move from job to job, which again, it's the reality of the economy. Even relatively successful people, good wage earners do this. So how do we sort of relook at how we do that? Because it's an absolutely old model that we tweak around the edges, but it doesn't fit anymore. And again, I think those are the kind of things that government should be working on to try to improve. Lastly, I will just say, I've made this point 5 times and I'll say it one more time. We need to find a way to vote out the minority who is controlling all of this bullshit. And they hide behind things like abortion and immigration and fear of other people and lies to mask what they really care about, and that's continuing to make this society more unequal. All they care about is amassing wealth and getting more wealth, and they prey to everyone else's fears about all these other things to pretend like that's what they care about, and they don't. It's all about money, and you can see it in Paul Ryan's face after he passed that stupid bill. That's all he cares about.
Oh.
Everything else is complete bullshit. And how we educate people to vote. And again, I'm not saying they don't care about things like abortion, but guess what? The people you elected don't really care about that stuff either.
Right.
All they're worried about is getting more money for the people who prop them up. And in the case of our president, getting more money for himself. So just how people don't see that that's what this is. If they see that and vote for it, it would make me sick, but at least understand what's going on. And again, the more we can talk about it and, have other people talk about it and hope that other people talk about it, the better off we are. But the system is rigged. We should not be making policy based on 0.1% of our fucking country. It's absolutely ridiculous. Why would we ever optimize the system for those fuckers? We shouldn't. Done.
Yeah, man. Resist.
I'm with you, Dave.
Resist.
Great points all around. I would just add to Dave's thing is that one of the things that my state representative who happens to live in our neighborhood does is he sends out a shout out to Reggie Thomas running for federal office coming up here. He got my vote.
Go Reggie. RT.
But no, he sends out every session. He sends out like a 40 to 60 question questionnaire, gets feedback from any constituents that will answer the surveys that he sends out the results of those surveys, and then sends out how he voted on all those. And if they disagree, he gives a justification for why he voted the way that he does. And, he's holding himself accountable. Nothing says he has to do that.
That's impressive.
Going back to what you all said,
awesome.
I think that there's, lost a long, long time ago, way longer than we've been doing this or since we've been alive, is that, politicians voted in their own best interests and forgot that they worked for the people. And as much as Donald Trump liked to parade that idea out there, he implemented identity politics the same way that the left did. The left used women and used ethnicity and race to try to win people to their side. Trump used race and class in the exact same way, and he said, "You are the forgotten people." But this goes back to Dave's point of.
But he's a racist.
Yeah.
And a New York real estate billionaire. I don't know how we got that demographic in his corner, but go on.
Well, he because of exactly what Dave said, that's where I was going with it. Is that we have to find a way to educate people on things beyond just single issues, and say that you can care about that, but you should be caring about this stuff too, because this affects your day to day so much more than this other stuff. And if you ever want a better life for yourself, for your family, for your kids, then you need to vote in your best interest the same way that these politicians have always voted in their best interest, which says fuck my constituents most of the time. So yeah, I think finding a new accountability system for these people beyond just whether we vote for them or not every 4 or 6 years or 2 years, but it's some method of accountability for these people. And I think the other thing is that we slash these salaries, and they should not be making more than a firefighter or policeman or any other public servant, teacher included in that. If you are a public servant, if you are working for the public, then you take the salary that they give you. You're doing it because of that. So, those are a couple things on the political side. Otherwise, I think that it is a bleak outlook, but I have to think that it's been this bleak before at different points and at different times. We didn't live through the Great Depression. We don't know what super high unemployment and super high poverty rates look like. People starving and standing in lines for free handouts for food and things like that. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, not on the scale that they saw during those times, and to see people scrimp and save. But we're seeing the start of, I think, a depression of a different kind of people having to figure out month to month how to get by so that they don't get into that place. I don't think that unemployment will ever dip that low unless we see something like a technological takeover. But my point is that we've had bad times before and different things come out of it. So I'm not completely unoptimistic, but if we don't keep doing things like what we're doing, even if it just matters to us, even if it just means we're getting more informed. And I mean, I had this conversation with some of my aunts and uncles, and I touted out some of the stuff that they talk about in here. So even though
you had this conversation at Christmas dinner,
fuck yeah, I did.
Oh boy, I've tried that before.
God, quote unquote, bless you.
Most of them agreed with me. My mom left the room.
Perfect.
The bottom line being that, the more that we can try to come from a place that I think looks out for more than just ourselves, the better off we are. So we'll see where it goes from here. We'll just keep taping our phone conversations and see if it goes anywhere.
I think it'll change the world.
I have no doubt.
Well, that's going to wrap it up then for episode 5. Good job in bringing together.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael Hobbs, for writing stylistically
One
informal.
last thing. I know that we've all had a beverage or two during this call. Can we just let everybody know what we were drinking?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. St. Arnold Ardcar IPA for me, local brew here.
Brennan?
Jason?
Yeah, I was drinking the Poet Oatmeal Stout from New Holland Brewing. I think it's it's got a raven on it, so I'm guessing that's an allusion to Edgar Allan Poe. And I believe, where's this from? Let's see here, New Holland, Michigan.
All right. I was drinking shitty red wine because I'm a masochist and want to feel worse than you guys tomorrow.
No wonder you have bad hangovers.
Well, you mix that with some strong-ass craft beer and, other things. Yeah, you'll have a hangover here and there.
That's true. Actually, red wine does make me feel the worst of anything.
Yeah, right.
Great talking to you, gents.
Well, gentlemen, as always, it's been real.